Okay, good evening. Call the meeting to order at 6 p.m. This is a special meeting on Wednesday, September 11th, and given the day it is, and also the fact that the town and this board lost a former colleague, Don Francis, I would ask for a moment of silence in remembrance of both September 11th and former Selectman Don Francis. Thank you. So the agenda tonight is for the interview of one of our proposed finalists for the position of town administrator, Graham Waters. If the board doesn't object, we'll follow the same process as last night, which will be Mr. Waters having an opportunity to introduce himself to the board. Then the board will have an opportunity to ask Mr. Waters some questions. And then if the board's amenable, we can have a discussion of the candidates and make a decision as to how we want to proceed moving forward. That work? All right, Mr. Waters, you're up. If you don't mind just going to the podium. Feel free to speak to us about anything you want us to know. We've been given your packets that the screening committee had assembled for us, so we have some familiarity. But anything you want to accentuate, anything that might not be in the packets, now's your chance.
Well, I think one thing I emphasized to the screening committee was that my partner and I currently live in Boston, and we rent. And after tonight's drive down here, it was about double the commute time during the midday interview I had. We were looking to relocate anyway, but this would be more of a incentive if I were to be chosen for the position. But so I started out in local government in Maryland. You can probably tell from my accent. My dad is from Texas and my mom is from Alabama, and I have a little bit of a twang that nobody can quite guess what the accent is, but I cut my teeth in local government in New Carrollton, where I learned the basics of municipal management, budgeting, human resources, capital planning. New Carrollton is a limited services government, so we had a police department, a public works department, and other departments such as the school department and sewer and water were all taken care at the county level. So I served in New Carrollton up until the end of 2015. During that time, I did go and get my master's degree at Penn State between 2007 and 2009. And then I found myself up in Rhode Island, where I was offered a position in Coventry. Coventry is a full-service town. It's 64 square miles, so it was 64 times the size of New Carrollton. New Carrollton is a very small urban city, old post-World War II development, much like Levittown. So it was a culture change and a government and management change as well. But in Coventry, I had a lot of successes where there were turnover of department heads, a couple of retirements, and so I was able to bring in some professional department heads and highly qualified staff. Some successes that I had in New Carrollton included implementing a capital parks plan. This was an achievement because the town, the city, had a lot of open green space that was being underutilized. So in partnering with the landscape architectural school at the University of Maryland, we brought on an intern who did some sketches for the town, and we had about 10 different parks and open spaces that we had designs for. And through that initiative, we instituted a long-term sort of capital investment in our open spaces and green spaces. And that was to help identify or help New Carrollton become more of a sense of place for the residents. Traditionally, it was a very different community. It had been, over the years, it had diversified quite a bit. The local high school had 64 different languages that were spoken among the students. So the traditional activities of baseball, tennis, and football had kind of changed over to soccer and different things. So redoing the green spaces was quite a good accomplishment and helped the residents. And then in Coventry, one of the things that they tasked me with doing when I started there was helping to also establish Coventry and giving it more of a sense of identity. Coventry is very fortunate that it had a section of the East Coast Greenway, which is a rail trail that goes from, I believe it's from Maine down to Florida, where you can essentially ride your bike the whole way. There's a large section of this that traverse the whole town. So there's a number of residents who would ride their bikes on the Greenway, and we use this as a way to promote a sense of identity for Coventry as well. So using that to help Coventry identify with a community of a biking community. So that's a little bit about my time in Coventry and New Carrollton. I could go on about different projects, but to keep it short and straight to the point, you will notice that I'm a credentialed manager. I believe strongly in professional development. I believe strongly in having professional development for those that serve around me and I work with. And what the credentialing means to you all is that you get a manager who believes in and who's required to invest in 40 hours of continuing education and professional development every year. So as a requirement of keeping that credentialing, I have to keep up those 40 hours.
Thank you, Mr. Waters.
Sure.
Mrs. Smith, you want to lead us off?
I will, because I'm the easy one.
Okay.
Where do you get to them two?
Okay.
First off, I've read over your resume.
Mhm.
Now, why are you interested in coming here to the little town of Raynham?
Well, it's not that little. It's 14,000 people, and from what I understand, it's grown quite a bit. So I am interested in Raynham. So I saw the advertisement, and when I started looking into the town itself and the staff and just the structure of the government, it appealed to me because I did see a sincerity by the committee members and those that volunteer on the finance committee and other such committees to have a really nice town. I also did see through the videos I watched the town meeting and a couple of the board meetings as well, that your staff comes across as very professional as well. So for me, somebody who believes in professionalism and those types of professional operations, Raynham is very attractive to me, as well as your desire to have a financially sound town. And I believe it was, Joe, I read that in, I believe it was an article about the increase in the credit rating a couple years ago, where you brought on the new treasurer, and your desire was to keep the credit rating agency ratings increasing. So that shows to me as a candidate that you're taking your finances seriously, and that's definitely a strong part of it. I also have a number of friends that I've developed since my time of moving up in New England who live around the Dartmouth, New Bedford area. So this is to work here would be a little bit closer to them, and it's always good to have friends in the area.
Sure is. Okay. Now, according to your comments here, you have investigated the town of Raynham. Now, what do you see as our greatest strengths? And what would you do as a town administrator to build on those strengths?
So I think you have a number of great strengths, and one of the things I learned about was most recently your desire to push for a update of your master plan. And the master plan really is a blueprint for the future growth of the town physically and in different aspects such as parks and recreation, education, and a whole bunch of other areas. So I see myself, I also know that there is the government study committee that is looking into updating the job description of the town administrator. As that committee finalizes its efforts and brings forward the final proposition to the board, it's my job to support that effort and to support you all as the board members. And I think you'll see that with me as a candidate, and if I were to be chosen as the next town administrator, somebody who really plays a professional role of bringing facts forward to the board, and not necessarily somebody who's political, but can help you all have the information at hand to make the proper decisions.
Excellent. Now, along the very same line, but on the other side of it, what do you see that the town needs as improvements, and what steps would you propose to take as town administrator to reach those goals?
I know that in December there was a sort of a survey that was passed out to the residents of the town, and I was able to, when I was reading through the government study committee minutes, I saw the mention of some of the results of that study. And I know one of the things that they mentioned was the pressure of development is one of the things that the residents are sort of weary about. And when I was watching the town meeting, I also learned that they really weren't opposed to development, but they just wanted the master plan to be put in place first before any large rezoning issues were decided upon. So that's one issue, as well as supporting the continuation and build out of sidewalks and roads, I believe was another thing that was mentioned.
Now, would you please describe in detail how you would meet the challenges of transitioning into the position of town administrator, and what would your transition plan be?
So, coming from my background, I have a wide, diverse experience in municipal government. I've managed a large town before, and I've managed a small urban city before. So, whether it's a small city or a large town, the assets of a management or the facets of a manager are pretty much the same. If I were to be chosen for the position, the first 60 days I would be looking at becoming more familiar with the town, establishing rapport with the department heads, getting to know my staff, getting to know those issues more, doing more research into the ongoing projects such as the master plan and where that process is, as well as getting to know the three of you a lot better, sitting down with you one-on-one. I think definitely within the first year, one of the things I would help encourage and demonstrate to you all is the need for an annual retreat. Annual retreat among the board as well as the department heads helps to establish goals and a vision for the town. And as leaders of the town, that's something that you all should espouse.
Now, as you may or may not know, we do have a regional school system.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any experiences at all in dealing with a regional government?
Yes, so in different forms. In Coventry, the school department was under the town. It was a large school system, relatively speaking. It had a high school, a middle school, and I believe 5 elementary schools. However, it was separate from town government, so I was not in charge of the superintendent, and he was appointed separately by the school board. The school board was elected separately. Also in Coventry, the water system was a regional water system. So it was the Coventry, West Warwick, and a couple other towns who joined together. It was a regional sort of organization. So back to the school district in Coventry, I had a very close working relationship with the superintendent. I think that's something I would definitely bring here, is reaching out to the school superintendent and really getting to know how the school system works as a regional school system, but really looking at what their initiatives are and seeing how they tie in with what the board and what the residents of the town desire.
Oh, thank you very much.
Acting as a bridge between the school system and the town, yes.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm Mrs. Easy.
Okay.
Here you go, Pat.
Can you hold on one second? I want to get some water.
Yes.
Oh.
You're going to need it.
I'll get my notes too.
You've already answered a few of my questions.
Okay,
But,
great.
thank you for applying and thank you for doing some research about the town of Raynham, too. Appreciate that. Could you, Mr. Waters, please describe what you see as the role and responsibilities of the town administrator's position, its interaction with the Board of Selectmen, and what particular skills you have that you feel will really benefit the position?
Sure. So much as Doug is doing now. Oh, excuse me, Gordon.
That's all right.
I would be sitting up there with you all and providing you with the advice and facts that you need when you're making decisions as elected officials. There often is a line that can be crossed between elected officials and an administrator, and that is something that I try to be very careful about not crossing, and that's when an administrator becomes too political and gets involved in the politics. And it's not my job as the administrator to be involved in the politics. It's my job to advise you all with the decisions. You are the politicians. I'm your professional staff. And again, as the town looks to adopt a new town administrator position, again, it would be learning what the expectations are about how strong that town administrator position is, and working with you all, the department heads, as well as others on the boards and committees and commissions in the town to embrace that new role and sort of help iron out the kinks and get people adjusted to how that role is changed from the past.
Okay, thank you. You've mentioned a number of your accomplishments from your past experience. Can you say what you're most proud of that you've been able to accomplish in one of the positions you've held?
Sure. Well, I told you about the parks plan in New Carrollton. I'm very proud of that because that really helped put a sense of new identity on an older city. As well, when I was there, I was very proud of bringing on a full-time human resources person. The city of New Carrollton had grown from 55 employees to a total of 95 by the time I left, and that was in addition. A number of those employees were police officers. So during my time in New Carrollton, we helped establish a new police department for the city. That was quite a learning and interesting experience to go through. So bringing on a human resources individual to help manage those growing pains and help the organization develop internally, that was something that I was very proud of. And that person is still there and has helped the organization become more efficient and has helped the talent pool within the city really develop.
Mm-hmm. In either of your positions, did you have very much experience with human resources?
Yeah, so before in New Carrollton, before the human resources person was brought on, I was in the role of the assistant city administrator, and I did a lot of the human resources functions. And both in New Carrollton and in Coventry, I served as the risk manager for both of those municipalities, and in both of those locations, I served on the local government cooperative risk pool board. So risk management is something that I'm very familiar with. Having safe employees in a safe environment helps to reduce insurance premiums for the town and save taxpayer dollars. So that's something that I have had a pretty good amount of experience with as well. And then in New Carrollton and in Coventry, updating the personnel policy, having a personnel policy that's updated to provide guidance to the department heads as well as the employees about good employment practices in the town. Also is another thing that I helped accomplish in both of those locations and also helped to reduce liability to those municipalities.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an example of a situation in your current or former position that in retrospect you wish you had handled differently and explained what you learned from the situation?
So in Coventry, they pay their employees current. So what that means is they get paid the Friday for the work that they did that week. There's no arrears. In New Carrollton, we did 2 weeks in arrears, so you get paid for 2 weeks from the day that the pay period ended. In Coventry, that was not the case. That was causing issues with the payroll staff who were having a hard time implementing changes in sick leave that employees were bringing to them, changes in union contracts regarding leave, were causing issues with payroll and those credits on employees' pay stubs. So one of the initiatives I tried to introduce was putting the pay period 1 week in arrears to help alleviate some of that burden from the payroll department. After negotiations with the employees and the employee unions, the best way that I found to do that was to slowly implement over a series of pay periods a reduction and a change in that pay period. So it would become 1 week in arrears. And unfortunately, it was too much pain for the employees, and there was a time where I got a letter from a state labor department saying that what I was doing was not permitted under state law, although the town council disagreed with it. It was a decision that if I were to go forward with it and continue to implement it, it'd probably be tied up in litigation between the unions and the management, and at the end I had to say, well, you know what, it's not worth the pain. So what I learned from that was sometimes change is, even if you think you have buy-in from the employees or from the parties that the change is being impacted on, isn't always as planned, and sometimes you have to take a step back and reassess and reevaluate.
Okay, thank you. How would you describe your management style on a day-to-day basis versus during a conflict, and explain how your management style inspires others to do their best work?
So my management style is different depending on who I interact with. If I'm interacting with the board, you'll see that I have regular communication with you all. I think good communication is something that is a constant across all the different areas that I manage. When I'm in the office, I keep an open door for employees and department heads and residents to stop in, or board members to stop in. I try to utilize different avenues of communication, email, phone, etc. But I also believe as a good manager, you should help promote team building. So team building to me is helping my direct reports to establish goals so they have something to aspire to. If they have successes within their department, if they have an accident-free month, celebrating those successes. And then, as well as I mentioned previously, helping the town, the board, and the department heads to help establish a vision so that everybody is working towards the same goals for the town. And that is done through the master plan, but more internally to the organization through a strategic plan as well.
Okay, thank you. Can you discuss your experience with the development of a budget and with presenting budgets to various constituents and to the community in as transparent a manner as possible?
Sure. So one thing I notice about Raynham is that the budget is not posted online. I believe there is a website where you can go and see the current expenditures and revenues. Forgive me, I can't remember the name of the organization, but I believe it's ClearGov, if I'm not mistaken. So having the budget and the audits posted online is one way to promote transparency to the residents. My experience in budgeting in New Carrollton, it was a strong mayor form of government. So as the city administrative officer there, I worked with the mayor and the department heads to help put together the budget. The department heads would bring their budgets to the mayor, and then the mayor would present his budget to the council, where the discussions would take place, and then the council would adopt the budget. There was no town meeting that had to vote on it. Once the council voted on it, it was enacted. There was public input through open forums, so residents could come in during the council deliberations and have their input into the budget as well. And then in Coventry, much more similar to here in Raynham, where there's a financial town meeting where at the end, after the town council adopted the budget, it went before the residents, and then the residents could vote on the budget and make changes if they wanted. So they could, up to a certain amount, they could either increase or decrease certain departments or areas of the budget. Those are the two municipalities I've served in and sort of their budget processes. One thing as a manager that I did in both locations was to send out a memo to the department heads ahead of time and asking for their input. But it's not just the department heads, because you also have to consider the boards and commissions. Even if they have a $500 paper supplies or copy budget. What I found in Coventry, we had a conservation commission that was barely active, and then they got a very enthusiastic member on the board, and all of a sudden they wanted to start building bridges on parkland and bat houses and different activities like that, and they were requesting money in the middle of the fiscal year, and I had to tell them, well, let's wait till the upcoming fiscal year and we can put that into your budget. So you have to consider those areas of the town as well.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned our master plan, and you've had experience with that, it sounds like. What would you say are the keys to having an effective or a successful master plan?
So in Coventry, during my time there, they were undergoing a renewal process of their master plan as well. And one of the most important things is having a contractor or a vendor who has had significant experience in other municipalities in implementing a master plan, and having their knowledge and experience to help go out and collect information from the community is important, because the other probably the most important thing, as you saw in the town meeting, was resident input into how their town is going to grow. So having a good contractor to help put together your master plan, you'll have better resident input. They'll do different outreaches, such as neighborhood charrettes, a survey that is sent out to residents, maybe going to other organizations such as the schools, PTA possibly, and getting that input, because you want to have as much input as possible into the master plan. So as it's being developed, you really have a good sense of the identity of the town as it has changed over time.
Okay, thank you. Can you describe any experiences you may have had with obtaining and managing any alternative sources of funding, whether it be grants or anything along that line?
Sure. In New Carrollton and Coventry, as well as my experience right now at Northeastern, I've had experience in grant management. Relative to municipal government, the Community Development Block Grant. In New Carrollton, we use the Community Development Block Grant to start an economic development initiative. And then in Coventry, we used the Community Development Block Grant to help with housing assistance and help residents improve their properties, or low-income residents improve their properties as well. And that really revolves around having areas of town that are designated as low-income by the census, and applying those funds there and looking at projects that can help benefit those areas.
You spoke about your work in Carrollton and Coventry. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you're involved in?
Sure. Yeah, I left that out in my introduction. So after my time in Coventry, my partner and I, we moved up to Boston. She works at Biogen in Kendall Square, and I work at Northeastern. I'm a grant manager there for the engineering college, and I help to manage about $25 million in grants for a couple different professors. And what that involves is making sure that they're spending the money as they should on the programs that the grants are awarded for, and when they have those expenses, that they're expensed against the grants and are being making sure that they're all properly being spent down.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more. The town of Raynham has been very fortunate to have wonderful resources in our community, including very active parent and community groups and local businesses. What strategies would you implement within the town to make sure that community support and involvement remains strong and continues to grow?
So one thing that I did in Coventry, and I really enjoyed doing it, was partnering with the school superintendent to do a semi-annual open house and meet and greet with the town manager and the school superintendent. And arguably, we were the two most powerful non-elected officials in the town. And residents really didn't know, especially for me being new, it was a good way for me to get my face out in the public as one of the different ways. As well as the school superintendent was relatively new as well. And it was very informal, no agenda. It was usually on a Saturday. Sometimes we would hold it in a firehouse. Sometimes it would be at the Parks and Rec Center in different areas of the town, just to provide a little access to different residents. And just sitting and listening. If somebody wanted to come in and complain, they could come and complain. If they wanted to ask questions, they could ask questions. And it was just an informal forum to interact with the town manager and the school superintendent. So I found that very effective in communicating with the residents, but I also enjoyed that sort of impersonal contact with them as well. And then another thing our police chief did in Coventry was having coffee with a cop. And that was once a month, sometimes a little less, sometimes more, depending on the weather and different things. But at a Dunkin' Donuts in town, having a Saturday where a number of police officers would come out and residents could come out and interact and have coffee and donuts and just sit and talk about public safety issues as well. And I would often attend those because, public safety as the town manager, I'm intimately involved with. So just a couple of examples. And I definitely continue those on here as well.
I know in your resume, and it points out that you're a strong supporter of public schools.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel about the police being involved in our schools?
I think they play a very important role in public schools. I think especially as our society is changing with the perception of police officers, I think having that police officer community interaction at an early age for residents and for school children can help develop relationships and a better environment for interaction between a police officer and somebody who might come in contact with a police officer. I think it also serves as good eyes and ears for the schools, of course, with public safety in our schools becoming much more urgent than it has in the past. And then also providing good role models for students to look up to. And in Coventry, the chief in New Carrollton, the chief started a cadet program for the local elementary school and middle school in the city. And they partnered with the schools to do a little study hall as well as teaching about public safety and the importance of public safety in the schools.
You alluded to the town survey that we had done back in the winter, and one of the top concerns of residents, too, was the challenge of trying to maintain the sense of community. And that's really important since we are having so much residential development, and a lot of the people that are moving into Raynham really don't have a connection to the town. Any ideas about what the town can do to try to keep that sense of community and even build upon it?
Well, I think your master plan is going to be very important. And I think the residents expressed that in the town meeting, that having that document and that resident input into the master plan is very important to helping to identify the future of Raynham and how you identify yourselves now and going into the future. And then like in New Carrollton and in Coventry, it's looking at your assets that you have as a town, whether it's your parks, your commercial areas, or your nonprofit organizations, and looking at those and what's being utilized by the community or what might be being increased as a utilized as an asset in the community. So if your schools are becoming much better, you might be becoming a community that is attracted to younger families for your improved schools. Because I know in Massachusetts, schools are very competitive, depending on which town you live in. So that might be something to help develop a new identity for the town and help residents to sort of invest themselves in and look forward to the future with.
Sure. What's your strategy for dealing with an angry person?
I've had lots of experience in dealing with angry people. And I'll tell you a little story. So I mentioned that Coventry is 64 square miles. And it's very suburban, much like Raynham in the eastern portion. And it's very rural in the western portion. It's a giant rectangle that stretches from central Rhode Island out to the western border with Connecticut. And before I started in Coventry, the planning board and the council approved the development of 10 wind turbines in the western portion of town. And I don't know if you've ever been up close or relatively close to a wind turbine, but they're not exactly quiet, especially when they get going. You hear a sound very similar to a freight train. So there are a number of residents who are upset in the western portion of town where they moved for the peace and enjoyment of that rural sense that they had, and that was being disturbed by those wind turbines. So one of the council members in Coventry invited me out to a listening session as she proposed it, and she gave me a little heads up that they're not exactly going to be friendly because they need somebody to vent at. So I had what ended up being a 4-hour meeting from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. of standing, much like I am before you, before about 20 different Western Coventry residents, and listening to their feedback about the wind turbines and other issues as well. And so for me, as a manager, when I'm dealing with a crowd of disgruntled residents or upset residents or an individual, it's about listening to what their issues are, because that's the most important thing. That's why they're upset. Nobody's listening to them, and it's trying to understand what they're upset about and empathizing with what their issue is, and helping them to see that somebody understands their issue and that there might be a path forward. So letting them know how their issue will be resolved, or what actions I would take as the town administrator to look into the issue.
Thank you. If a member of the board asked you to do something that you disagreed with from a policy standpoint, what would you do? And if you disagreed from an ethical standpoint, what would you do?
So from a policy standpoint, it'd be a matter that would have to come before the board. So there's 3 of you. If there's a vote on a piece of legislation that 2 of you vote in favor of and 1 disagrees with, then it's the majority of the board who voted in favor of the legislation, and the policy that results from that gets put into place. And the disagreements get hashed out here in the chambers, and input and into the policy and into the legislation get done before it's adopted. After the board passes the legislation, then it's my job as the administrator to make sure that policy gets put into place, whether it's a public works policy, a police department policy, or an administrative policy. And if there's a board member who disagrees with that policy after the fact, then it's my job as the administrator to say, well, let's put it back on the agenda and have it discussed again. And maybe there's something or some new information that wasn't discussed before that you'd like to bring up. So it's moving forward with the board's decision and implementing that policy. And then if there's continued issues, making sure I work with that individual or individuals to find the best avenue to address their issues, and that would be bringing it back to the board. If it's an ethical issue, it would be discussing it with the town councilor, the town attorney, to see how it depends on the type of ethical issue. And then it might just be a matter of going to the board member and addressing it with them and letting them know that, hey, this is a little bit of a gray area. You might want to be careful how you handle this. The state law says this, or it looks kind of funny if you do it this way, and it might be something that you aren't familiar with. Often you might see that with a planning board. In Coventry, one of the things I had done during my tenure was getting the planning board educated by our planning attorney, who was and our planning department director, who both of those parties had experience in planning, long experience, and just educating the all-volunteer board about the different implications of their decisions on approving developments in the town. So it might be something that is just a matter of education, and it's educating the individual about what they're doing might be unethical or seen as unethical.
Thank you. My last question, what do you see as the most compelling reason why you should be our next town administrator?
So I think there's a number of reasons why I should be your next town administrator. I think I have the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities to be the administrator. I think you can see that through my education. I think you can see that through my experience in my municipalities that I've served in before in my previous roles, as well as the ideas that I can bring forward to Raynham as far as helping to implement the new master plan or helping the community develop a better sense of identity and a vision to believe in, as well as carrying that over into the department heads and with the board itself. So I bring a number of facets to the town that both professionally and sort of outside of the box thinking and creativity that will benefit the town.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
All set.
Okay.
Okay, Joe.
Take
You've
some
been
water.
very patient. Huh?
That's what my middle name is.
That's
Patience.
good. That's good.
Oh, my. Watch it, the horns are going to come out.
So I'm going to start with a hard one for you, Graham, and then it's going to get a little easier.
Sure.
As I'm sure you can imagine, as a town, we wanted to do our due diligence as the two finalists were presented to us.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that came up with you was an article a few years back about potentially you have filed a disclosure late or not have filed it at all. Can you just give us a little background on that and let us know what the dynamics were with that? Was it filed late? Was it ever filed? Are you familiar with what I'm asking?
I am, yes. So in Rhode Island, as I believe it is in Massachusetts, you should have to file an annual financial disclosure about if you're an elected official or if you're a department head or if you're a town manager administrator. So as was the case in New Carrollton, every year I had to file a financial disclosure as the assistant city administrative officer and as the city administrative officer. When I got to Rhode Island, nobody informed me that I had to file a disclosure. Ultimately, when it was brought to my attention, I filed it that Saturday. It was brought to my attention on a Saturday morning. I filed it the Monday that I got into the office, and I called up to the State Ethics Commission. The State Ethics Commission didn't have on their record that I was the town manager of Coventry. So I think it was just an issue of me being new to the state and the information that I was the town manager being passed on to the state and then them notifying me that I had to file a disclosure. It was not brought to my attention by any of the town personnel either. So it wasn't intentional, and as soon as I had the opportunity to file it, I filed it. And in fact, I filed this year my one for last year in Rhode Island.
Perfect. Thank you. In looking at your resume, there was one thing that did pop at me, and I want to make sure I'm reading it right. It appears as though there was a 6-month period in time between your first stint as the assistant city administrator, your internship, and then returning as the assistant city administrator. If that's correct, can you explain that?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I served in New Carrollton, and you can see it from my resume from 2005 to 2007, and then I left and went up to UPenn to get my MPA, and I had an internship there. And the internship ended in December of 2008, and I finished up my master's shortly thereafter. During that time, I was searching for other positions, mostly in Pennsylvania, but I was contacted by New Carrollton to come back to my old position. And so in the June of 2009, I returned to New Carrollton.
Thank you.
Mhm.
One of the other questions I had, you had answered earlier, so I'm going to skip that. When we talk about human resources, to me, you have to go down a level and talk more specifically about labor relations.
Mhm.
And where you've never had a municipal role in Massachusetts before, it may or may not be a learning curve for you, but CBAs are extremely strong in Massachusetts. The union presence is extremely strong in Massachusetts. And outside of our department heads, our staff is a unionized environment. Can you talk about your familiarity with CBAs and more particularly progressive discipline and the negotiation? Because just for your knowledge, how we do it here is one of three of us would negotiate the contracts, but whoever the town administrator is kind of sits second chair and assists with that process.
Yeah.
So it's a very hands-on, in-depth process where we go from literally start to execution and signing the documents.
Yeah, I actually I saw that when I was reviewing I asked the town to send me copies of the contracts, and I saw where you are all involved with the negotiations. And I think that's a great way to go. In fact, in Rhode Island, when I was the town manager, I was the lead in negotiating with the unions. However, that was my first experience with collective bargaining. We had a really good union attorney who provided the advice that when you go into negotiations, whether it's a police union or a municipal union or a firefighters union, you should have a department head who is affiliated with those unions. So in the case of the municipal employees, we had the Parks and Rec director, the police chief, because he oversaw some of the municipal union employees, as well as the public works director. Then we also had one of the town council members involved with the union negotiations as well, because ultimately at the end of the day, they had to vote on it. So having somebody who was on the council be in the room as negotiations were taking place, they could say, well, that might not fly with the council, and we might not vote having that in the contract. So having that sort of political input during negotiations was very helpful. So I think the way you do it here is excellent. And I think here, I think having department heads involved in negotiations, depending on which union it is, can help bring a sort of a different management point of view to the negotiating table.
Good, thank you. One of the things that's important to me, and as we deliberated, and you alluded to it, we've tweaked the position a little bit, and we've given it a little bit more authority. But at the end of the day, this board still is the chief executive officers of the town.
Yes.
And it's unique in Massachusetts where we're the executive branch, but we also have a quasi-legislative function. But I'm curious to see what your comfort level is dealing with that, because I think it's probably going to be a hybrid between where you were with the strong mayor and then where you had a council, because where there's three of us, we're sharing the executive authority. But again, I think to avoid conflict later on, it's important for whoever takes the position to understand what exactly the role is of their position and the function of this board.
So, as I alluded to in some of my answers, I think as the position is finalized and as it's adopted by the board, it's really figuring out what everybody's expectations are and what the Government Study Commission's intentions are with the position as they bring it forward to the board. In New Carrollton, as I mentioned, is a strong mayor government, so I had to do a lot of collaboration with the police department and public works department. So I learned some good lessons about collaborating with other department heads there. And I know yesterday I had the opportunity to speak to Randy Buckner, who was the long-serving town administrator here. And he said, Graham, you have to understand, it's not a town manager government. It's a town administrator government, and traditionally has been very weak. When I was serving in the positions, was a weak administrator government. And I said, I told him about this Government Study Commission, and I said it's changing, but whether it's a weak administrator position or strong administrator position, it's about knowing what the expectations are from the board, and then as well as from the commission as the job has changed.
Good, thank
Yep.
you. Final question, and you've touched upon, I think, a little bit of what your answer might be, but my last question is, why Raynham?
You.
It's a good answer.
Well, in all seriousness, yeah, because like I said, I read that quote about you and the treasurer taking fiscal discipline serious, and when I was getting my master's degree, I had a concentration in public finance. I know how important a good fiscal house is to have. But that carries on beyond just your relationship with the treasurer. It shows me that the town is serious in one aspect, and it's probably serious in a lot of the other aspects, and treating its departments with professionalism and respect, and making sure that services are dressed in a professional way. And really, that's what I'm about, is trying to bring a level of professional service to the town and making sure the residents have those services that are expected.
Perfect, thank you,
Yeah.
Graham. I think that's all we have for questions. Do you have anything else you want to add that combined our 90 questions didn't get from you?
Yeah. So, well, one thing you mentioned in the union contract question I didn't touch on was progressive discipline. I know the contracts do have those within them. So for non-union employees, again, going back to the human resource question, it's making sure having those policies in place for non-union employees as well, and having a personnel policy in place that defines that progressive discipline. I know some towns have personnel boards. So that might be something that the town wants to look at in the future. It might not. It might be something that they say, well, we think the town administrator should handle all personnel issues that are not defined within the contract. So that's something that would be a future discussion as well. So just to touch on that. But the questions that I have for you all, if you can give me a second here. Here we go. So you had a long-serving administrator, Randy, and then a short-serving administrator, and you're undergoing a new change in the administrator position. So the three of you, what are your expectations of the town administrator from each of your individual perspectives, as it was in the past, and then possibly how it will change in the future with this new job description?
Mrs. Smith, you want to lead us off?
No.
No? Okay. Miss Riley?
Seriously. Well, I think I expect a town administrator to be able to handle any and all problems, issues, or anything else that comes out of every department that the town has. I expect them to be personable with the people that are coming into the building, and also with every department head. They should get to know them, know the work that they do, be able to stand behind them when a resident comes in and has a little problem. Hands-on, more than anything else. And I see this town as continuously growing, and it is going to grow. And it is a great town. It is a great town. There's been many things that have happened in this community and will continue because of the people who have, are still here.
Miss Riley?
Yes, I see the town administrator's position working in collaboration with the Board of Selectmen. I was an advocate for the Master Plan Committee because our community is experiencing so much growth that I think it's really important to have a vision of where we need to go and some really good planning. And I think that's important, and a town administrator that just can provide us with the information that we need to make the right decisions. And someone that cares about the community, wants to get out into the community to meet with our different groups and so forth. Obviously, your focus is in the office, but I think you represent the town too, and certainly things like what you mentioned about meeting with the superintendent and meeting with doing things with the police chief and so forth. I think collaboration is so important. We have many groups and committees in town of wonderful, people, many of them volunteers serving, and our departments do a great job. I'd like to see a little bit more collaboration between the different groups and our different departments.
Yeah, just real quick, it was a while ago I was interviewing, or I was preparing for an interview with another town, and I read about one of the board members who had an initiative that he had started where once a year the board, as well as all the commissions and committees, were invited to sort of a informal meeting, just because there were so many different boards and commissions and volunteers and changeover in volunteers that there was no face-to-face time. And I think that's something that helps improve relationships among the boards and commissions, and you might not know who's on the Parks and Rec Committee or the commission.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think my two colleagues answered it pretty eloquently, but I think to me, our most successful employees are ones who've had a genuine commitment to the town. And to me, I think that whoever we select, if they're able to embody those qualities, then I think we'll be in good shape.
Yeah. Well, one thing I should mention is I had a fairly long tenure in New Carrollton, and unfortunately, while I expected to have a longer tenure in Coventry, things change. But I do expect to have a long tenure here as well.
Good.
It's something I'm looking for, that stability. And change is slow, and changes that need to be implemented take time.
Mm-hmm.
So having that long tenure helps to steer the ship of the town in that future direction. So,
Good. Thank you. Anything else for us, Graham?
So the master plan is being implemented. How do you all see the future of the town? I believe it wasn't too long ago that the population of the town was 10,000, and now it's 15,000 and growing. As we discussed, there was feedback from residents during the town meeting about the pressures of development. What are your inputs about that, and where do you see the future of the town going?
Mrs. Smith, any comment?
I see the future of this town as very, very good. We have a great commercial base, and we will continue to encourage business to come here. As far as growth is concerned, you can only grow as much as what you have available.
Mm-hmm.
And there's practically nothing left in this town to build on that's really buildable land.
Mm-hmm.
So as I see the people coming in, if they can orient themselves into the community,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have any problem in that area.
And I asked, what are your thoughts on the proposed or the impending train station that's coming?
The what?
The Raynham Place station, part of the South.
South Coast Rail.
Oh, the South Coast
yes,
Rail.
yes. Mm-hmm.
My opinion on the South Coast Rail. Well, I'll tell you, I
Speaking
got
of development pressures.
Yeah. I really have no opinion, to be perfectly honest with you, because I don't use the train. I don't go into Boston as they do. If it is going to help the community, then yes, I would want it. If it's going to be a detriment to the community and the people who live on the old rail, then no.
Yeah.
Ms. Riley, anything?
As far as vision for the town, I'm concerned about keeping that. Raynham's a great town. We have great volunteer groups, great involvement, community involvement in Raynham.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm concerned about keeping that community connectedness. We have certain things like this Sunday, we're having a Raynham Pride Day. We do a parade. We do lots of things, and I think we need to do more of that. The town has to grow, yes, but to the extent possible, to try to keep that community connectedness.
What do you see that has been successful in the past that would be successful going forward in the future? Or maybe, for example, in Coventry, there was a arts and crafts fair that my first year there was a couple of volunteers who put on, and it was an excellent turnout. We had a number of vendors, both locally and from the greater New England area, come in and sell their wares, and that was something that continued during my time there, and I think it has continued currently. And it was really a new initiative that the town started, and more so the residents. Do you see something like that here?
I think anything that we can do along those lines to get people involved, especially, like you said, the new people, to get them feeling as though they're part of the community. We have great athletic sports interested people, lots of teams in town. I've been involved with the volunteer group in the schools, which connects with the community. The schools do things with the senior center and with different aspects of the town, and I think we need to do as much of that as we can.
What we do have in our town, too, is our cable.
Yeah.
Cable is great. Not only does it bring people together, but the person, Mike Kalin, who is the executive director of the cable station, has turned the old school building that we had into a new station, has remodeled it, and allows many other entities to use it. The Friends of the Library come in. They do performances there. They have all kinds of office.
I've seen a number
in.
of them posted online.
And it's really great. The Girl Scouts go in there. We have, 4 Girl Scout troops or 3 Girl Scout troops that go in there and use the facilities.
Yeah.
So it's become almost a community center within the town.
That's good.
And that's a great asset for us. It really is. I want to see more of that.
I think in terms of growth, as Mrs. Smith said, there's not a lot of it left, and so to me, it's applying highest and best use and evaluating projects on that threshold. And in terms of South Coast Rail, I've been saying it for at least 15 years. It's a political and historical inevitability. And so if and when it comes, and if and when we have a stop, it's about mitigating the obvious, in my opinion, the obvious detriments to our community, including traffic. I'm not sure how in-depth you are with the study, but it was proposing a rail crossing across 138, which is one line each way, which would be a significant detriment to not just our residents, but also our commercial base. So managing some of those nuanced things within the proposal.
I'd say finally, what would you say, 1 or 2 things that if I were to be chosen for the position, and you kind of put this toward me, so I'll flip it and put it back towards you, in the first 6 months to the first year being in the position, that I would need to focus on as the town administrator.
Mrs. Smith?
And maybe Gordon can touch on it a little bit too, since he's been in the position for a little bit.
What would you focus on? Well, really quite I really don't know at this point what your main focus would, well, I know what it would be, but I don't dare say it, Joe.
I have no idea.
Oh, boy.
Yes, you do. No, I'm going to pass and let Pat start.
Okay.
Thanks. I think first 6 months would just be, getting
learning
involved in the
experience,
community, getting the background information. Obviously, we have coming up very soon, we have our fall town meeting, and then the annual town meeting is in the spring. I think just getting to know the community and that master plan, because that's going to be starting. So that would be really important.
Okay.
Are you a football fan, Graham?
It depends.
Okay.
I don't follow it religiously.
All right. Well, I think
I dare not say that. I'm more of a DC Baltimore fan.
all right. I'm not a Patriots fan. My team is the Raiders, so
Oh.
we're okay. But the reason why I ask is
How many death threats?
Yeah. I think whoever we get in this position, it's like setting up the ground game in a football game. You can't expect to run the ball effectively if you don't start running till the fourth quarter.
Right.
And so I think the first couple of months, it's going to be you acclimating yourself with the community, with the board, with the stakeholders, with our department heads, and then hopefully in a collaborative approach, we will be charting what the course looks like moving forward. But I don't think it's fair to you or to this board to toss priorities on you right away when you haven't got your seat warm yet.
Do you think the 3 of you would be receptive to doing a retreat of the board where you help establish goals not only for the town but for us as a team?
I think fundamentally it's a good idea. I think the concern that the board would have, and I know Ms. Riley's thinking it because I can see it in her face, is open meeting law.
Yeah. Well, of course it'd be open.
Yeah. So we would just have to work out the dimensions on that, but.
Prior to this, I served on the school committee, regional school committee for 12 years, and we did sort of that type of thing.
Yeah.
We actually had someone come in and speak to us from the Ethics Commission about what we need to know along those lines and conflict of interest and all of that.
Yeah.
So I would be in favor of something along that line.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to give 4 words.
Sure.
Communication and follow-up.
Okay.
Mr. Luciano's concise.
Yeah.
Anything else for us, Graham?
No, I'd just say, are there questions that you broached with me? Is there anything that I can provide additional information for? Any questions that I didn't quite get everything? Okay, thank you.
We appreciate it.
I really appreciate your time. You know, I can't tell you how enthusiastic I am about this position. The more I researched the town, the more exciting it was. I really enjoyed my interview with the interview committee. They seemed like a great group of people. I believe all but one of them served on the board before, so there's something there to be said that everybody enjoys participating in the town, and you know, it's good. It says a lot about the town that the residents are invested in its well-being. So, thank you very much, and
Thank you, Graham.
I appreciate your time.
We will be in touch.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. As the board knows, it's on the agenda discussion. The way I see it is we have two options. We can have a discussion tonight of the two candidates and make a decision, or we can put it off on Tuesday's agenda and take the weekend to digest the two candidates and go from there.
Put it off till Tuesday.
Ms. Riley?
I will second that. I think we have two excellent candidates, extremely well qualified. I want to compliment the Government Study Committee for their due diligence in reviewing all the applicants and bringing two such highly qualified applicants to us. So I think to review our notes and make a decision on Tuesday would be totally appropriate. So I
Okay.
would second that.
All right, so that will be,
On the agenda for next
Next
Tuesday,
Tuesday,
in
Mr.
public
Luciano?
session
Yes.
for, you want me to post discussion and possible vote?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that works. All right.
Please.
There's nothing else on the agenda, so I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Would you
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.